Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Stephanie Ho.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming and thank you for having me here. They asked me to speak about the effects of the recent legislation has had on women of Arkansas. As an abortion provider, I see firsthand the impact of how these regulations have affected the ability of my patients to obtain this legal medical service. I also plan to talk about some things that we can do to help protect the women's reproductive rights in the state. But firstly, I would like to give you a little bit of background information about me and the journey that has brought me here before you today. When I first started working at Planned Parenthood in April of 2013, my plan was to provide medication abortions as discreetly and quietly as possible in my own little corner of the universe. I've always known that this is a much-needed service for women and that it should be as easily accessible as any other elective procedure. I knew about the arguments on both sides of this issue, and I knew that anti-choice organizations were very outspoken around the country and even around the world. I've always firmly believed in a person's right to autonomy and a woman's right to decide what is best for her, her family, and her circumstances. However, I had no idea the lengths that our lawmakers would be allowed to meddle and regulate a woman's right to make her own medical decisions, and without good reason, no less. It wasn't until recently that I have become an active advocate for reproductive rights, and my only regret is that I didn't do it sooner. We were taught about standards of care and best practices, and we were taught that medicine is ever evolving as new studies and research guide us to provide better care for our patients. We are presented a problem, we study the best ways to handle that problem, and we share that information with our colleagues. As time goes by, we are constantly looking for less invasive, more convenient, and more economical ways to help to provide care to our patients. Changes to medical protocols are based on evidence, scientific evidence, plain and simple. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for our anti-choice legislators. Changes that have been made in the recent months and years have been presented and approved by anti-choice lawmakers for the sole purpose of placing obstacles to discourage women from obtaining an abortion. An overwhelming majority of these lawmakers are not physicians, they are not scientists, and they have no basis or evidence behind their reasoning to make these changes. They claim that they are changing the laws to protect women. They would have us believe that women are incapable of forming their own decisions on what to do with an unplanned or abnormal pregnancy. They would have us believe that women do not contemplate the decision to have an abortion enough, and therefore must be forced to take more time to consider their decision. And they would have us believe that they know what's best for women, but we all know the truth. Act 1086 requires a woman to travel to a health center to receive partially inaccurate medical information from a physician and unnecessarily forces a delay in her accessing abortion to at least 48 hours. In my experience, most women have been contemplating their decision for days to weeks. This is a difficult decision for any patients to make, and none of my patients have taken this decision lightly. In Arkansas, this 48-hour rule actually equates to a waiting period of 4 to 7 days. Because in addition to providing medication abortions 1 day a week in Fayetteville, I also have a family practice in Fort Smith where I see patients the other 4 days a week. There just aren't enough doctors willing to provide this necessary service, and I am one of 3 in the abortion providers in the state, and one of 2 that provide the medication abortion pill. For example, if a patient were to see me for her state-mandated, partially inaccurate mandatory counseling in Fayetteville, she would have to wait at least a week to see me again for her medication. If she needed or wanted to take the medication sooner, she would have to travel to Little Rock to see a different provider to take that medicine. Alternately, if a patient were seen in Little Rock, she would have to travel to Fayetteville if she wanted her medication sooner than 1 week's time. For women, this means taking more time away from work or school, spending more money to pay for travel and childcare, and it sometimes means they cannot obtain medication abortion at all. The majority of women I serve are low income. This places an unfair and unconstitutional burden on their shoulders, which is exactly what our lawmakers intended on causing. As many of you already know, this increases the rate of unplanned pregnancies to the already financially strapped women in the state, thereby perpetuating the cycle of poverty. which is another issue that many of our lawmakers have no intention of solving if it means money away from their pockets or the pockets of their people. Along with forcing the patient to travel to the health center more than medically necessary, all our lawmakers have forced women to remain pregnant longer, which in some way is a punitive form of punishment for some women. Along with the mental strain that waiting imposes, women often have to continue to battle the physical symptoms of their pregnancy. Women with severe nausea and vomiting must endure at least 4 more days of symptoms, which can affect her health, her family life, and her ability to work or attend school. Lawmakers have no right forcing physicians to provide medically inaccurate information. Abortion providers in Arkansas are forced to tell their patients that there may be a way to reverse the effects of medication abortion drugs. This claim was made by one U.S. physician without studies, without research, and without any evidence behind that work. Our lawmakers have forced me to lie to my patients. For all of the doctors in the state and in the country, lying to, deceiving, or misinforming patients is an act with legal, financial, and career-changing ramifications. For abortion providers, there is a clear and obvious double standard. And their ultimate goal is to convince women to remain pregnant by using my voice to misinform. Luckily, abortion providers still have the right to free speech, and I, along with my colleagues, have been very forthcoming with relaying our lawmakers' true intentions. I have always and will always provide my patients with the information they need and want to make an informed decision for any safe, legal medical procedure for which they may be considering. Nor do they have the right to impose their beliefs on us, especially regarding issues that affect our health. Conversations about healthcare decisions are deeply personal and legally protected. The only 2 parties that must be in on that conversation are a woman and her doctor. Nowhere else in medicine are politicians permitted to interfere or meddle in these sacred conversations. Allowing lawmakers to force doctors to say or do certain things is essentially allowing them to practice medicine without a license. Is a particularly onerous bill that it would ban evidence-based regimen for medication abortion and require a doctor who provides medication abortions to have a contract with a licensed OBGYN with active admitting, surgical, and gynecological privileges. Luckily, we have a temporary stay on this act, but we must continue to fight to keep that from going into effect. Instituting the FDA recommendations would have many negative effects on the women of Arkansas. It would require women to take 3 times the necessary dosage of the abortion pill, which in turn means the necessary dose. 3 times the abortion pill, which in turn obtaining the service would be more expensive and unnecessarily prolong the time that she can. I apologize. There's a glare on my screen. All right, try again. Means obtaining the service will be more expensive and will unnecessarily increase a woman's cramping and pain. Women would only be allowed to take the medicines in a short window of time when compared to the evidence-based regimen. Currently, we provide medication up to 9 weeks or 63 days gestation, but the FDA regimen would disqualify the use of medication abortion drugs past 49 gestation, often before many women even know they're pregnant. Women would be forced to travel to the clinic a total of 4 times. Ideally, a woman would come to the clinic twice. Her first visit should entail having an ultrasound for proper dating, being counseled, and being allowed to take the abortion pill. And her next appointment would be her follow-up to ensure that the pregnancy is passed. The 48-hour rule currently forces women in Arkansas to come to the clinic 3 separate times. Their first visit includes an ultrasound and counseling. Her second visit, which is 4 to 7 days later, she comes for further counseling and to take the abortion pill, which is also known as mifepristone. She would take the second medication in 24 to 48 hours in the comfort and security of her own home, and her third visit is to follow up. If Act 577 were to remain in place, a woman would have to come to her first clinic visit for an ultrasound and counseling. 4 to 7 days later, she would come for her second visit to receive further counseling, to take the abortion pill under the physician's supervision. At least 48 hours later, she would have to return to the clinic a third time to take the second medication, and her fourth visit would be a follow-up. In addition to making this extremely inconvenient and expensive, the regimen makes it potentially unsafe for women. The second medication, called misoprostol, is a medication that induces cramping and bleeding that's necessary to empty the uterus. If a woman were to take this medication in my presence, she would potentially start bleeding in the clinic or on the road to her home, and would likely need a driver, since we recommend a sedating medication for nausea prior to taking that medication. This eliminates her choice to go through this process privately, and if she were to encounter complications and need medical attention, she may have to wait for an ambulance in the clinic or on the side of the road, or present to an emergency room in a town that she may be unfamiliar. As I stated before, medicine is driven by evidence. There are numerous studies that demonstrate the evidence-based regimen to be superior to the FDA-recommended regimen that was published when the medications were first approved for this use over 15 years ago. In fact, the American Medical Association and the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology have both stated the evidence-based regimen to be superior. How a politician is given merit over a medical governing body on any medical issue still puzzles me. To my knowledge, no other physicians in the state or in the country have been forced to abandon the use of medications for off-label purposes. Act 577 also states that an abortion doctor who provides medication abortions must have a contract with a licensed OBGYN. This issue has also undergone extensive investigation and studies within the pro-choice community. Having a contract with an OBGYN with these privileges has not shown to improve patient care if complications were to arise. As I stated before, women often travel many miles to obtain an abortion. If a patient has returned to her hometown in, for example, southeast Arkansas, she is very unlikely to go to the hospital for which that contracted physician is associated, as that may be on the other side of the state. Women go to the nearest emergency room if they have problems. And emergency room doctors are trained and competent in caring for a pregnant woman who is bleeding. There are protocols in place to ensure a woman can be stabilized and referred or transferred to an OBGYN should she need one. Another way this act is meant to place an obstacle is the fact that there have yet to be any OBGYNs in the state willing to sign that contract with Planned Parenthood. In addition to being medically unnecessary, this act would further alienate abortion providers and those doctors associated with them. I've spoken to numerous OBGYNs throughout the state, and they've refused to help Planned Parenthood meet this ridiculous requirement, sometimes because of personal beliefs, but mostly due to their unwillingness to be associated with abortion care. Abortion doctors and abortion clinics have long been targets of anti-choice activists and extremists. And these hate-spewing zealots have struck fear into the very doctors that should be providing this service as a regular part of their practice. We don't need another incident like the one in Colorado Springs to know that safety is a major concern in this field. This environment of hate also threatens doctors and medical institutions with financial ruin for being associated with abortion providers. We saw Act 996 take away state grants to any organization that offers abortions or refers for abortions. So instead of formal referrals where care can be transferred properly, there are whispers of who the patient can see for an abortion, and if the patient's lucky, she may even get a phone number or address written down for her where she can find care. So the important question is, what can we do to fight for the rights of women in Arkansas?